Mark Peterson had always been the ambitious type, tall, handsome, and in his early 30s. He was the kind of man who turned heads whenever he walked into a room. He worked as the senior marketing executive at Hawkins Industries, a company that had climbed the ranks in the business world, largely thanks to its CEO, Rachel Hawkins, a woman both feared and admired in equal measure. Rachel was a powerhouse, sharp, intelligent, and at 42, she had more control over her life than anyone Mark had ever known. She was also breathtakingly beautiful. At first, Mark admired her from afar. She was intimidating, with her cold demeanor and laser focus on the company. But as fate would have it, their paths began crossing more frequently. Late nights at the office, one-on-one meetings where the air was thick with unspoken tension. Rachel's eyes lingered a little too long on Mark's, her voice slightly softer when they were alone. The attraction was undeniable. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. One night, after a particularly successful project, Rachel invited Mark to her private office to celebrate with a glass of scotch. What started as a casual drink turned into something more when Rachel, leaning over her desk, whispered, "You've caught my eye, Mark." Before either of them could stop it, they kissed. It was dangerous, exhilarating, and utterly wrong, but neither cared. That night, their affair began, cloaked in secrecy, hidden from the prying eyes of their colleagues and, most importantly, from Mark's wife, Lisa. Chapter 2. A Double Life. Mark had always been good at keeping secrets. He convinced himself that his affair with Rachel was harmless, just a way to blow off steam from the pressures of work. After all, Lisa didn't need to know. He loved his wife, didn't he? They had been together for 5 years, and though their marriage had lost some of its initial spark, they were still happy, or at least, that's what Mark told himself. But as the weeks passed, Mark found himself increasingly drawn to Rachel. She wasn't just his boss anymore. She was his obsession. They met in secret at her luxurious penthouse apartment, their meetings growing more frequent, more intense. Each time, Mark felt a rush, like he was playing with fire, and the heat only made him crave her more. At work, things became more complicated. Rachel started favoring Mark openly, assigning him to more high-profile projects, praising him in meetings. It didn't take long for rumors to spread. His colleagues began whispering behind his back, throwing knowing glances his way whenever he was called into Rachel's office. Meanwhile, at home, Lisa began noticing changes in her husband. Mark was distant, distracted. He worked late nights more often and seemed less interested in spending time with her. Lisa, ever the supportive wife, chalked it up to stress, but deep down, she felt something was wrong. Mark's double life was becoming harder to maintain. Juggling his home life with Lisa and his secret affair with Rachel was taking a toll. He had to constantly be on guard, deleting text messages, coming up with excuses for his late nights, and hiding the guilt that gnawed at him. But no matter how careful he was, secrets always have a way of surfacing. It started small. Lisa found a receipt for an expensive dinner he hadn't mentioned. She brushed it off, thinking it was work-related. Then came the nights when Mark's phone would buzz with a text, and he'd rush out of the room to answer. One day, while cleaning out his suit jacket, she found a lipstick-stained handkerchief. It wasn't hers. Her suspicions grew, but Lisa wasn't the type to confront without proof. She became a detective in her own marriage, checking his phone when he was in the shower, watching his every move. The more she dug, the more her worst fears were confirmed. One night, while Mark was working late, Lisa followed him. She wasn't sure what she expected to find, but when she saw him enter Rachel Hawkins' penthouse building, her heart shattered. Watching them through the glass, seeing the way Rachel touched him, how Mark smiled at her, Lisa's world crumbled. The next morning, Mark walked into his home to find Lisa waiting for him at the kitchen table, her eyes swollen from crying. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. Mark's heart sank. He knew this moment would come eventually, but he wasn't prepared for it. He had no idea what to say, how to explain his betrayal. "I know about Rachel," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "I know everything." Mark froze. The room felt suffocating as Lisa's words hung in the air. There was no point in denying it. The guilt he had been suppressing for weeks came crashing down on him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words felt hollow, even to him. Lisa didn't want his apologies. She wanted answers. But more than that, she wanted revenge. "I gave you everything, Mark," she said, her voice filled with bitterness. "And this is how you repay me. By having an affair with your boss." Mark tried to explain, tried to justify his actions, but everything he said only made things worse. Lisa was furious, and rightfully so. She stormed out of the house, leaving Mark alone with the wreckage of his women. Lisa wasn't just going to sit idly by and let Mark and Rachel get away with their affair. She was determined to make them pay. She started by doing some digging into Rachel's personal life, looking for anything that could be used against her. It wasn't hard to find. Rachel had her own secrets, and Lisa was more than willing to expose them. Meanwhile, at work, things were unraveling for Mark. The rumors had reached a fever pitch, and his colleagues were growing resentful of his special treatment. Even worse, Rachel was becoming more possessive, expecting Mark to prioritize her over everything else, including his crumbling marriage. One day, Lisa showed up at Rachel's office, unannounced. The tension in the room was palpable as the two women faced off. Rachel, always the composed CEO, tried to play it cool, but Lisa wasn't there for small talk. "I know about you and my husband," Lisa said, her voice ice cold, "and I'm not going to let you ruin my life." Rachel smoked, but Lisa wasn't intimidated. She pulled out a folder filled with evidence she had gathered on Rachel's shady business deals, financial discrepancies, and personal scandals that could destroy her career if they ever came to light. "If you don't end this affair and back off, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are," Lisa threatened. Rachel's confidence faltered for the first time. She realized Lisa wasn't bluffing. The affair had turned into a power struggle, and Mark was caught in the middle. Rachel, fearing that Lisa might follow through on her threats, tried to distance herself from Mark, but the damage was done. The workplace was no longer a safe haven. People were talking, and soon enough, word reached the board of directors about the inappropriate relationship between the CEO and her subordinate. Rachel was forced to step down from her position, her reputation in tatters. Mark, too, found himself out of a job. No one wanted to work with someone who had used an affair to climb the corporate ladder. His once promising career was in ruins. At home, things weren't any better. Lisa had filed for divorce, and their house was filled with silence and resentment. Mark had lost everything: his job, his marriage, and his dignity. But Lisa wasn't done yet. She had destroyed Rachel's career, but she wasn't satisfied. She wanted Mark to feel the full weight of his betrayal. So, she took everything in the divorce: the house, the car, the savings. Mark was left with nothing. Desperate and alone, Mark tried to salvage what little was left of his life. But the people he once relied on had turned their backs on him. He had become a pariah, shunned by his colleagues and abandoned by his wife. Rachel, too, had fallen from grace. With her career in ruins, she retreated into isolation, her once glamorous life now a distant memory. Months passed, and Mark, broken and humiliated, had to start over. He moved into a small apartment and took a low-level job far from the corporate world he once knew. He spent his days reflecting on his mistakes, haunted by the choices that had led him to this point. Lisa, on the other hand, thrived. She had rebuilt her life, stronger and more determined than ever. The betrayal had hurt, but it hadn't destroyed her. In fact, it had made her more resilient. As for Rachel, she quietly disappeared from the public eye. No one knew where she went or what became of her, and frankly, no one cared. The affair that had once been a thrilling secret had led to the downfall of everyone involved. The affair that had started as a dangerous thrill had escalated into a battle of power betrayal, and revenge. In the end, no one came out unscathed. Mark had lost everything, Lisa had exacted her revenge, and Rachel had paid the price for playing with fire. The lesson was clear: secrets, lies,